Tonight, we will tell you a story not of grand battles or ancient empires, but of something far more intimate, yet equally shaped by destiny. The strangest wedding nights in history. You will journey with us through centuries, from ancient Egypt to Victorian England, to witness unions that were anything but ordinary. You will discover how extreme youth and dynastic burdens weighed on royal children, how imperial eccentricities could subvert all tradition, and how defiance and secrecy could forge a nation. We will explore the immediate, profound distaste that could doom a marriage from its very first hour, the heavy tension that foreshadowed tragedy, and the immense public and personal pressures that could delay a union's true beginning. You will understand how mutual disdain could become a political calculation, and how even unions of deep affection faced the relentless glare of public scrutiny. Oh, and if you enjoy these stories, please consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a comment. Your support helps us to continue crafting these journeys into the past, released for you every single day. All right, find a comfortable spot, let your mind drift, and prepare to step into moments when private vows met public consequence. We begin our journey in the warm, ancient lands of Egypt, with a union of two children thrust onto a throne too soon. Tonight, we embark upon a most unusual journey, one that takes us behind the grand ceremonies and the public spectacle of historical weddings, into the quiet, often hidden moments that followed. We will explore the concept of the wedding night, not merely as a private union, but as a crucible where the immense forces of history converged with the deeply personal experiences of individuals. For while a wedding, throughout the ages, has served as a public declaration, a societal affirmation, and often a joyous celebration of union, the night that follows is universally understood as a deeply intimate affair, a quiet transition, a personal beginning. Yet, in the intricate tapestries of the past, even these intensely personal moments were frequently anything but simple, private, or predictable. They were profoundly shaped by forces far grander than mere affection or individual desire. They were molded by the weighty demands of empires, the intricate machinations of political power, the silent, unyielding pressures of dynastic succession, and, on occasion, by the profound and sometimes peculiar eccentricities of the individuals themselves who found themselves at the heart of these unions. Consider for a moment the vast, undulating landscape of human history. Within this boundless expanse, countless lives have unfolded, each tracing its own unique path, experiencing its own spectrum of joys and profound sorrows, its own moments of soaring triumph and quiet heartbreak. Among these myriad experiences, the moment of marriage, particularly for those individuals burdened by the weight of crowns, or those who carried the very future of nations upon their shoulders, was rarely, if ever, solely a matter of two hearts finding a natural connection. Instead, it frequently served as a crucial strategic alliance, a carefully calculated political chess move, a vital consolidation of territorial power, or even, in times of great uncertainty, a desperate gamble for the very survival of a lineage or a kingdom. And the wedding night itself, that traditionally anticipated haven of intimacy, new beginnings, and quiet connection, often transformed into a complex stage where these monumental historical forces collided with raw human emotion, deep-seated vulnerability, and, at times, considerable awkwardness. profound discomfort, or even palpable danger. We will embark upon a deliberate journey into these extraordinary narratives, delving into the stories of rulers who were thrust into unions at an age when most children are still learning the most basic lessons of the world. Their tiny, unpracticed hands forced to grasp the heavy reins of power even as they grappled with the fundamental mysteries and anxieties of approaching adulthood. You will bear witness to the truly bizarre and often unsettling spectacles orchestrated by certain emperors, figures whose personal desires and sometimes unstable eccentricities so thoroughly warped the very fabric of established tradition that they transformed what should have been sacred ceremonies into strange, almost theatrical performances, blurring the lines between private life and public display in ways that shocked and fascinated their contemporaries. We will also uncover the hushed tales of secret vows exchanged in the deepest hours of the night, clandestine unions forged deliberately against the powerful, often tyrannical wishes of influential families or reigning monarchs. These were moments where genuine affection, or perhaps an even stronger ambition, defied the ever-watchful eyes of the world, risking everything, reputation, freedom, and even life itself, for a chance at carving out a different, perhaps more desired, future. You will come to understand the intricate dynamics of alliances that were meticulously forged, not out of any romantic inclination, but purely for the acquisition of valuable land, the securing of prestigious titles, the establishment of fragile peace treaties, or the grim necessity of preparing for impending war. These were unions where the bridal chamber, typically a sanctuary of intimacy, became, in essence, a high-stakes diplomatic battlefield, and the hopes, fears, and even the very destinies of entire kingdoms rested precariously on the perceived success, or, conversely, the deeply felt failure of a single, highly scrutinized private encounter. We will consider the immense, almost suffocating public scrutiny that invariably surrounded these prominent historical figures, where every subtle gesture, every barely whispered word, every perceived triumph or devastating setback on that inaugural night could send powerful reverberations throughout the court, across distant nations, and echo down through the long corridors of the centuries, indelibly shaping reputations and, in profound and often unforeseen ways, altering the very course of history itself. These narratives are not merely tales of grand romance, nor are they simply dry chronicles of intricate political maneuvering. At their core, they are profoundly human stories, revealing the inherent vulnerability of individuals, even those who occupied the very pinnacle of power, when confronted with the overwhelming and unyielding pressures of their exalted station. They vividly illustrate how the trajectory of destiny, whether freely chosen or harshly imposed, unfolded in the most intimate and personal of settings. They serve as a poignant reminder that behind the grand imposing titles and the glittering ceremonial regalia, there existed real people with their own deeply personal hopes and gnawing fears, their own moments of shyness and overwhelming anxieties, their own profound desires and often crushing disappointments. So, as the world outside your window gradually begins to quiet its ceaseless activity, and your own thoughts, perhaps, begin their gentle drift towards repose, allow yourself to settle in comfortably. Permit your mind to be effortlessly transported across the vast expanse of time and across distant continents. We will journey from the opulent, sun-drenched palaces of ancient Egypt, where child ruler bore the weight of divine lineage, to the tumultuous, intrigue-filled courts of Renaissance Europe, where marriage was a tool of statecraft. Our path will lead us from the gilded, echoing halls of imperial Rome, where emperors indulged in startlingly bizarre whims, to the solemn, often chilly chambers of Victorian England, where duty and public image reigned supreme. Each distinct story we encounter will offer a unique and illuminating window into a specific moment in time, a peculiar and often unsettling circumstance, a deeply personal struggle playing out within the grand, sweeping canvas of a historical narrative. We will explore these narratives with a gentle, unhurried pace, allowing the established facts to speak clearly and directly for themselves, weaving them together into a seamless and engaging tapestry. This story is specifically designed to calm your active mind and gently invite a deeply restful sleep. There is no need for haste, no need for any sense of urgency. We will simply observe, we will learn, and we will reflect on the strange, often surprising, and sometimes profoundly ironic ways in which history unfolded, even in its most private and intimate moments. Prepare now to discover how what should have been the most private of acts became, in fact, pivotal public historical events. How the seemingly minor personal quirks of powerful individuals unexpectedly shaped the destiny of entire nations, and how, in the long arc of time, the strangest of beginnings sometimes led to the most enduring and profound of legacies. Let us now begin our quiet journey into these extraordinary nights, allowing the gentle whispers of the past to guide us towards a tranquil and restorative present. Tonight, we delve into an ancient world, a land of gilded tombs and eternal rivers, where unions were forged not by affection, but by the relentless machinery of power and destiny. Our first journey takes us back more than 3 millennia to the sun-drenched banks of the Nile and to a wedding night unlike any other, one shaped by extreme youth and the crushing weight of a collapsing dynasty. Imagine ancient Egypt, a realm that believed its pharaohs were living gods. In the midst of the tumultuous 18th dynasty, a young boy, perhaps no older than 9, was placed upon the double throne of Upper and Lower Egypt. His name was Tutankhamun, and he was the son of the controversial pharaoh Akhenaten, who had attempted to revolutionize the very soul of Egypt by abandoning its ancient gods in favor of a single sun disk, the Aten. This radical shift had plunged the kingdom into religious and political chaos, alienating the powerful priesthoods and unsettling the common people. When Akhenaten died, his grand experiment crumbled, leaving behind a power vacuum and a deeply divided nation. Into this fractured world stepped Tutankhamun. He was born Tutankhaten, reflecting his father's devotion to the Aten, but upon his ascension, his name was swiftly changed to Tutankhamun, signaling a return to the worship of Amun, the traditional chief deity. This act alone was a monumental repudiation of his father's legacy, a desperate attempt to restore order and appease the furious priests and a restive populace. But a pharaoh, even one so young, could not rule alone, nor could he truly legitimize his reign without a queen of suitable royal lineage. And so, his bride was chosen, Ankhesenamun. She was his half-sister, the third daughter of Akhenaten and his legendary great royal wife, Nefertiti. Like Tutankhamun, she was barely a child when this momentous union was decreed. perhaps just 12 or 13 years old. In ancient Egypt, royal intermarriage, even between siblings, was not uncommon. It was seen as a way to preserve the purity of the divine bloodline, to ensure that the sacred essence of kingship remained untainted. But for Tutankhamun and Ankhesenamun, this union was more than tradition. It was an urgent political imperative. Their marriage was intended to merge the two most direct lines of descent from Akhenaten, thereby consolidating power and presenting a unified front to a kingdom yearning for stability. Their wedding night, therefore, was not a celebration of romantic love or even a joyous union of two young hearts. It was a solemn, deeply political ritual, witnessed not by family and friends in a private setting, but by the watchful eyes of the entire royal court, the powerful viziers, and the reinstated priests of Amun. You can almost feel the heavy silence in the grand torch-lit chambers of the palace, the air thick with incense, and the unspoken expectations of a nation. These two children, dressed in the elaborate regalia of their divine office, were performing the most critical role of their young lives. Their hands were joined, their vows exchanged, not out of choice, but out of absolute necessity. The burden placed upon them was immense. They were expected, above all else, to produce an heir, a child who would secure the dynasty and provide clear succession, finally putting an end to the instability that had plagued Egypt. This expectation would have overshadowed every aspect of their early married life. For years, their union would have remained unconsummated, a formality, until they reached physical maturity. Imagine the quiet, lonely nights in the vast royal palace, two children, now husband and wife, sharing a chamber, perhaps playing games or simply talking, bound together by an extraordinary fate. They were children living under the shadow of immense adult responsibilities, their every movement, every interaction, scrutinized by a court desperate for a sign of divine favor and continuity. They were forced to oversee the reversal of their father's religious revolution. Grand temples dedicated to the Aten were dismantled, their stones repurposed. The names of the old gods were recarved onto monuments, and the powerful cult of Amun was restored to its former glory. This was not a task for children, but for seasoned politicians, yet it fell to them. They were the visible symbols of this profound change, the young faces of Egypt's return to its ancient ways. Their names were inscribed together on countless artifacts, on a golden throne, on a ceremonial dagger, on the very walls of their tomb, always side by side, a testament to their shared heavy duty. As they grew older, the pressure to produce an heir intensified. We know from archaeological evidence that Ankhesenamun suffered at least 2 miscarriages, both of which resulted in stillborn fetuses discovered in Tutankhamun's tomb. Each loss would have been a devastating blow, not just personally, but dynastically. It was a failure to fulfill their primary purpose, a sign, perhaps, that the gods were still displeased. The weight of these losses, combined with the constant scrutiny and the pervasive sense of political maneuvering around them, must have been suffocating. Their wedding night, and indeed their entire marriage, was therefore a strange and poignant testament to the demands of ancient kingship. It was a union born of crisis, sustained by expectation, and ultimately marked by tragedy. Tutankhamun himself died at a shockingly young age, perhaps around 19, leaving Ankhesenamun a widow, still a young woman, and without a living heir. Her subsequent attempts to find a new husband, even reaching out to the Hittite king for a prince, speak volumes about the desperate need to maintain the dynastic line and her own precarious position. Her fate after Tutankhamun's death remains shrouded in mystery. Her name fading from the historical record, the story of Tutankhamun and Ankhesenamun's wedding is not one of romance, but of duty, childhood lost, and the immense unyielding forces of history. It reminds us that even the most intimate moments in the lives of historical figures were often dictated by forces far beyond their control, leaving them to navigate a world that asked everything of them, from their earliest breaths to their final, often quiet ends. Allow this ancient tale to settle in your mind, a testament to the strange and unexpected paths that power can forge, even on the most sacred of nights. Let the echoes of their young lives, intertwined with the destiny of an empire, guide you deeper into a peaceful and restorative rest. From the ancient sacred unions of pharaohs, we now journey across the Mediterranean Sea to a world of opulent power and unchecked ambition, the heart of the Roman Empire, where the next extraordinary wedding night would unfold. This story concerns an emperor whose name echoes through history as a byword for extravagance and cruelty: Nero. He was the fifth Roman emperor, ruling from 54 to 68 AD, a figure whose reign was marked by both artistic pursuits and tyrannical acts. His personal life was as dramatic and controversial as his public one, often blurring the lines between private indulgence and imperial decree. Nero had already been married multiple times, most notably to Poppaea Sabina, a woman of renowned beauty and sharp intellect. Their relationship was tumultuous, yet it was clear that Nero held a deep, if possessive, affection for her. She was a central figure in his life, and her sudden death in 65 AD plunged the emperor into a profound, albeit perhaps self-pitying, grief. The circumstances of her death were tragic, with some historical accounts suggesting it was due to Nero's own violent outburst. Regardless of the exact cause, her loss left a gaping void in his existence, and in his desperation, he sought to fill it in the most unconventional and unsettling manner. Consumed by sorrow and perhaps guilt, Nero began to search for someone who bore a striking resemblance to his lost Poppaea. His imperial agents scoured the empire, driven by the emperor's increasingly bizarre desires. Their search eventually led them to a young man, a freedman named Sporus. Sporus was an adolescent when he caught the emperor's eye. He was a eunuch, a male who had been castrated, often from a young age, a practice that in some cultures was used to create servants or guardians for harems. But here, it was to preserve a certain delicate, youthful appearance. Sporus possessed a remarkable facial likeness to Poppaea Sabina, particularly her delicate features and fair complexion. This resemblance, combined with his gentle demeanor and perhaps his youth, captivated Nero. The emperor saw in Sporus not just a person, but a vessel for his unresolved grief and his obsessive need to recreate what he had lost. What followed was not merely a romantic liaison, but a full-blown public marriage ceremony, performed with all the traditional Roman rites. This was not a private indulgence, it was a spectacle designed to shock and to assert Nero's absolute power to defy every social and biological norm. The ceremony itself mirrored a genuine Roman wedding. There would have been the pronouncements, perhaps even the traditional procession, but with a grotesque inversion of roles. Nero, the emperor, was the groom, but Sporus, a male, was presented as the bride. Imagine the scene within the opulent halls of the imperial palace, perhaps adorned with rich tapestries and the scent of exotic incenses, as the murmurs of the court officials and senators would have filled the air, a mixture of shock, amusement, and profound unease. The Roman elite, though accustomed to Nero's eccentricities, found this particular act deeply unsettling. For a Roman man, especially an emperor, to take on the role of a groom to another man, especially one presented as a bride, was an affront to deeply held societal values concerning gender, family, and the natural order. Yet, no one dared to openly challenge the emperor. The power of Nero was absolute, and dissent meant death. So the wedding proceeded, a bizarre charade that underscored the emperor's increasing detachment from reality and his boundless capacity for self-indulgence. After the ceremony, Nero treated Sporus as his legitimate wife. He dressed Sporus in women's clothing, complete with veils and elaborate hairstyles, and took him on public appearances, including his grand tour of Greece. The emperor would openly refer to Sporus as his wife, and sometimes, even more disturbingly, as Poppaea. This was not just a private fantasy, it was a public declaration, a demand that the entire Roman world acknowledge his peculiar domestic arrangement. Their wedding night, if one could even call it that in the traditional sense, would have been steeped in this strange, forced illusion, a reflection of Nero's psychological state. It was not a night of traditional union or hopeful beginnings, but one of unsettling role play and a desperate clinging to a past that could not be revived. Sporus, for his part, was a victim of circumstance, trapped in a role he could not escape. He was forced to participate in Nero's increasingly erratic behavior, enduring the emperor's whims and public humiliation. He was a constant companion to Nero in the final years of his reign, witnessing firsthand the emperor's descent into ever further madness and tyranny. Their marriage was a chilling testament to the corrupting influence of absolute power and the lengths to which a person might go to deny reality. It was a union born not of love or political alliance, but of grief, obsession, and a profound perversion of traditional Roman ideals. The bizarre saga of Nero and Sporus continued until the very end of Nero's reign. In 68 A.D., a series of revolts led to Nero being declared a public enemy by the Roman Senate. Faced with capture and execution, the emperor ultimately took his own life. With Nero's death, Sporus was no longer bound by the emperor's will. However, his peculiar status and his association with the fallen emperor meant his troubles were far from over. He became a pawn in the political struggles that followed. He was taken by Nymphidius Sabinus, a praetorian prefect, who briefly sought the throne, and then by Otho, another emperor who briefly reigned after Nero. Both men, in a grotesque echo of Nero's actions, were said to have taken Sporus as a companion, dressing him in women's attire and treating him as a substitute for Poppaea. This repeated humiliation, this constant denial of his own identity, proved too much for Sporus to bear. When he was finally ordered to appear on stage and play the role of a woman in a theatrical performance, he chose instead to take his own life, putting an end to his tormented existence. The story of Nero and Sporus remains one of the strangest and most disturbing marital tales in history. It was a wedding that defied not just social convention, but perhaps even the natural order, born from the depths of an emperor's grief and unchecked power. forcing a young man into a role that ultimately led to his tragic end. It serves as a stark reminder of how far the boundaries of human behavior can be stretched when authority goes unchecked, and how even the most intimate moments can become public spectacles of personal and political chaos. This union was not one of hope or continuity, but of a profound, unsettling disruption, an eerie echo of a world spinning out of control. Rest now, as this strange chapter closes, and we prepare to move to another moment of historical marital peculiarity, one that, while perhaps less overtly scandalous, was equally fraught with defiance and destiny. We have explored unions born of immense power and personal eccentricity, but now let us turn to a wedding night shrouded in secrecy, defiance, and profound risk, one that laid the very foundations of modern Spain. This is the story of Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand II of Aragon, whose marriage was not merely a personal union, but a strategic act of rebellion that reshaped a continent. Imagine the Iberian Peninsula in the mid-15th century. It was not a single unified nation, but a patchwork of Christian kingdoms, Castile, Aragon, Portugal, alongside the last remaining Moorish stronghold, the Emirate of Granada. Within this complex political landscape, two young individuals were destined to change everything, yet their path to union was fraught with danger and political maneuvering. The very air was thick with intrigue and the shifting sands of alliances. Isabella was a princess of Castile, half-sister to the reigning King Henry IV. Her early life was marked by constant political intrigue and a profound sense of uncertainty regarding her future. King Henry, known as the Impotent by some of his detractors, faced a deeply disputed succession. His daughter Juana was widely rumored not to be his own child, creating a powerful and vocal faction within the nobility that vehemently supported Isabella as the rightful heir to the Castilian throne. Henry, desperate to maintain control and secure his own position, sought to manipulate Isabella's destiny by arranging politically advantageous marriages for her. He considered serious proposals from the elderly King Afonso IV of Portugal, a powerful and ambitious neighbor, and from a much older, frail French duke, Charles of Valois, Duke of Berry. These proposed unions were not conceived out of love or mutual choice, but were purely calculated political moves designed to secure vital alliances and, crucially, to prevent Isabella from consolidating her own power base and becoming a direct rival to his authority. But Isabella was no mere pawn in a royal chess game. She was a woman of formidable intellect, deep personal piety, and an unyielding iron will. She understood the immense stakes involved, and she held a firm conviction that she had a higher calling: to unite the disparate Christian kingdoms of Spain and ultimately complete the Reconquista, the centuries-long effort to reclaim the entire peninsula from Moorish rule. To achieve this monumental task, she knew she needed a partner of equal ambition, strategic foresight, and unwavering capability. That partner was Ferdinand, the young Prince of Aragon. He was a cousin to Isabella, a fact that would later present a significant hurdle to their marriage, requiring a special dispensation from the Pope due to their close blood relation. Ferdinand was every bit as shrewd and determined as Isabella, a proven and skilled warrior and a keen, pragmatic politician. The prospect of their union represented an incredibly powerful and transformative force. the potential merging of the two largest and most influential Christian kingdoms in Spain. Such an alliance would create a truly formidable entity, capable of finally extinguishing the last Moorish presence in Granada and projecting unified Spanish power across the burgeoning landscape of Europe and beyond. King Henry IV of Castile, however, vehemently opposed this specific match. He saw it as a direct and undeniable challenge to his royal authority and a complete disruption of his carefully laid plans for alliances. The very real threat of his immediate intervention, or even a swift military confrontation to prevent the union, loomed large over the young couple. Isabella and Ferdinand understood with chilling clarity that if their true intentions were discovered before their marriage was legally solemnized, their ambitious plans could be shattered irrevocably, and their very lives might be placed in grave and immediate danger. And so, a clandestine operation, meticulously planned and executed, began. Isabella, with the unwavering help of her most loyal and trusted supporters, made her moves with extreme caution and cunning. She had been living under constant surveillance, every action and communication watched by the king's network of agents. She had to navigate a complex and treacherous web of spies and informants. Meanwhile, Ferdinand embarked on his own perilous journey. To avoid any detection that could lead to his capture or the thwarting of their plans, he traveled disguised as a humble merchant servant, part of a small, deliberately inconspicuous retinue. This was decidedly no grand royal procession with banners and trumpets. It was a desperate, stealthy dash across what was effectively hostile territory, through winding, often dangerous roads and anonymous, small villages, where a single misstep, a suspicious glance, or a sharp-eyed guard could expose their true identities and bring their entire enterprise crashing down. They carried few possessions, relying solely on the absolute loyalty and discretion of their carefully chosen companions. The air during this journey must have been thick not only with the dust of the road, but also with the palpable tension of impending discovery. Finally, after days of anxious, secretive travel, Ferdinand successfully reached Valladolid, a city strategically located within Castile, where Isabella had managed to gather her most fervent supporters. The wedding itself, when it finally took place, was a stark and deliberate contrast to the usual grand public spectacles of royal unions. It occurred on October 19, 1469, in a small, intensely private ceremony, most likely held in a quiet, unassuming house or a modest, secluded church far away from any prying eyes or public scrutiny. The attendees were remarkably few, limited strictly to only the most trusted confidants and loyal noblemen who were deeply invested in their cause. There was no opulent display of wealth, no grand procession through the city streets, no cheering, adoring crowds. The atmosphere would have been charged with an intense mixture of profound hope, a sense of quiet triumph, and a pervasive undercurrent of apprehension about the inevitable repercussions. A profoundly crucial and precarious detail of their union was the necessity of a papal dispensation. As first cousins, Isabella and Ferdinand were considered too closely related under canon law to marry without special permission from the Pope. Fearing, quite rightly, that King Henry would exert his influence to block any legitimate request for such a dispensation, Isabella's shrewd allies initially produced a daringly forged papal bull, a document supposedly granting the necessary ecclesiastical permission. It was an incredibly bold and inherently risky move, a deception deemed absolutely necessary to ensure that the marriage could proceed quickly and without any immediate delay or challenge. This forgery, a testament to their audacious spirit, would later be superseded and legitimized by a genuine papal dispensation once their union was an undeniable fait accompli. But for that critical moment, it allowed them to proceed with the ceremony, sealing their fate. The wedding night itself, therefore, was not one of lavish celebration and carefree joy, but rather of quiet, determined triumph and the dawning, sober realization of the immense challenges that lay immediately ahead. They were married, yes, but their union immediately plunged Castile into a prolonged and bitter period of civil war, known to history as the War of Castilian Succession. King Henry IV, predictably enraged by Isabella's brazen defiance and her successful maneuver, formally and publicly disinherited her, reaffirming his daughter Juana as his sole heir. The battle for the Castilian throne, a conflict that would define the next several years, had truly and decisively begun. For Isabella and Ferdinand, their wedding night marked the very beginning of a profound and enduring partnership. This was decidedly not the traditional dynamic of a passive bride and a dominant groom. They were truly equal partners in ambition, in strategic planning, and in the complex art of governance. They faced their first night as a married couple, not in the secure, opulent confines of a royal palace, but in a city that was effectively a contested territory, with the ominous threat of war already looming large on the horizon. Their union was a powerful testament to their individual courage, their shared vision for a unified Spain, and their remarkable capacity to act decisively under immense pressure. It was a union forged not in peace, but in the intense crucible of political conflict and personal risk. The immediate aftermath of their marriage was a clear and powerful testament to their exceptional strength, resilience, and remarkable synergy. They spent the next several years relentlessly fighting to secure Isabella's legitimate claim to the Castilian throne, a brutal and exhausting struggle that tested their resolve, their ingenuity, and the very foundation of their alliance to its absolute limits. But through all the hardships and the relentless pressures of war, their bond only deepened, built on a foundation of mutual respect, unwavering trust, and a deeply shared purpose. This clandestine wedding, born of desperate necessity and audacious defiance, truly marked the undeniable birth of a new and transformative era for Spain. It was the precise moment when two extraordinarily determined individuals, against formidable odds and conventional expectations, chose their own destiny and, in doing so, irrevocably forged a nation. Their unusual wedding night, strikingly devoid of the customary pomp and circumstance, was perhaps the most fitting and truly symbolic beginning for a partnership that would ultimately change the course of European history, leading directly to the triumphant completion of the Reconquista, the momentous funding of Christopher Columbus's epoch-making voyages, and the dramatic emergence of Spain as a dominant and formidable European power. It was a union where the deeply personal and the profoundly political were inextricably intertwined from the very first moment, setting the grand stage for one of the most powerful, influential, and enduring royal couples the world has ever known, a legacy that echoes through the centuries. From a hidden union born of ambition We now turn to a union forged in political necessity, yet doomed by a king's fastidious gaze. Our story moves to Tudor England, a realm dominated by the powerful and often tempestuous figure of King Henry VIII. He was a monarch known for his grand appetites, his towering ego, and, most famously, his relentless pursuit of a male heir, a pursuit that led him through 6 marriages and reshaped the very fabric of his kingdom's religion. After the tragic death of his beloved third wife, Jane Seymour, who had finally given him his longed-for son, Edward, Henry found himself once more in need of a queen, not only for the sake of an heir, but also for political stability. Europe was a chessboard of shifting alliances. The powerful Catholic nations of France and the Holy Roman Empire were formidable, and Henry, having broken with Rome, needed allies among the Protestant states. His chief minister, Thomas Cromwell, a shrewd politician who had risen from humble beginnings, saw an opportunity. He proposed a marriage to Anne of Cleves, a princess from a German duchy within the Holy Roman Empire whose family held Protestant sympathies. Such a union would strengthen England's position against its Catholic rivals. To aid in the negotiations, the renowned court painter Hans Holbein the Younger was dispatched to paint Anne's portrait. Holbein was a master of his craft, capable of capturing the essence of his subjects. The portrait he returned with depicted a woman of serene beauty, with a gentle expression and finely detailed clothing. Henry, viewing this image, was reportedly pleased. He had a romantic streak, a belief in love at first sight, and he imagined a beautiful, compliant wife who would bring joy and a strong alliance. Anne of Cleves herself was not a woman of great political experience or sophisticated courtly graces. Raised in a more conservative court, she spoke no English, and her interests lay in needlework and domestic pursuits, not in intellectual debate or lavish entertainments. She was, in essence, a simple, good-natured woman, entirely unprepared for the demanding and often perilous world of Henry VIII's court. As Anne journeyed across the Channel to England, Henry, eager to surprise his bride and perhaps to experience a moment of romantic spontaneity, decided he would meet her incognito before her official arrival in London. He rode with a small retinue to Rochester, where Anne was resting on her journey. Dressed in a disguise, he burst into her chambers, expecting a delighted and immediate recognition. Instead, Anne, unfamiliar with English customs and not recognizing the heavily disguised king, reacted with polite indifference. She continued to play cards. Barely acknowledging his presence, Henry was immediately and profoundly disappointed. The woman before him did not match the radiant beauty of Holbein's portrait. Her features, which Holbein had perhaps softened or idealized, seemed plain to him. Her demeanor was reserved, not the passionate response he had envisioned. He retreated, his mood darkening instantly. "I like her not," he is famously reported to have exclaimed. His romantic fantasy had shattered upon the hard rock of reality. Despite his intense personal revulsion, the political machinations were too far advanced to easily reverse course. The alliance with Cleves was important. Cromwell had staked his reputation and indeed his life on this marriage. And so, on January 6, 1540, King Henry VIII and Anne of Cleves were formally married at the royal palace of Placentia in Greenwich. The ceremony was, by all outward appearances, grand and traditional. Trumpets sounded, courtiers bowed, and the usual pageantry unfolded. But beneath the gilded surface, a profound unease permeated the air. The king's sour mood was palpable, his face betraying none of the joyous expectation usually associated with a wedding. Anne, perhaps sensing his displeasure but unable to comprehend its depth, maintained a quiet dignity. The grand hall, usually filled with laughter and celebratory chatter, seemed to hold a silent tension, a faint chill that no amount of the torchlight could dispel. The true test, the moment that would define the marriage in the eyes of the church and the succession, came that night. The royal couple were led to their bedchamber. The usual elaborate bedding ceremony, a public ritual confirming the union, took place. Courtiers witnessed the king and queen retire to their bed before leaving them to their privacy. But privacy brought no intimacy. The following morning, Henry confided in his closest advisers, including Cromwell, that he had been unable to consummate the marriage. He complained bitterly about Anne's appearance, describing her as having loose breasts and a flabby stomach. He claimed she did not have the qualities he desired in a wife. He even suggested that she might not be a virgin, though this was almost certainly a pretext to justify his aversion. Anne, for her part, seems to have been utterly bewildered. She later recounted to her ladies-in-waiting that the king would simply enter the bed, kiss her good night, and turn his back. When asked if she expected to be pregnant, she reportedly replied, "I know no more than this. He cometh to my bed, and kisseth me, and taketh me by the hand, and biddeth me good night, sweetheart. And in the morning, farewell, darling. Is not this enough?" Her innocence, or perhaps her naivety, regarding the expectations of a royal marriage was striking. She did not understand the crucial importance of consummation for the legitimacy of their union and for the continuation of the Tudor line. The failure to consummate the marriage provided Henry with the grounds he desperately sought for an annulment. He could not and would not continue in a marriage that repulsed him and offered no hope of a future heir. The political alliance, once so promising, now seemed less vital than his personal aversion. The consequences for those who had arranged the marriage were severe. Thomas Cromwell, the architect of the union, swiftly fell from power and was executed a mere 3 months after the annulment was declared. The annulment itself came swiftly in July 1540, just 6 months after the wedding. Henry claimed a pre-contract with another noble, though this was a thin excuse. Anne, ever practical and perhaps relieved to escape such a volatile husband, agreed to the annulment without protest. In exchange, she was granted a generous settlement, including several estates and a substantial income. She was given the honorary title of the King's beloved sister, and lived a comfortable, albeit quiet life in England, outliving Henry and all his subsequent wives. Her strange wedding night, a moment of profound personal and political failure for the king, ultimately led to her survival and a surprising degree of security. It stands as a stark reminder of how even the most carefully planned dynastic unions could unravel due to the unpredictable whims and personal prejudices of a powerful monarch, shaping not only individual fates, but the course of history itself. The royal unions we have considered so far, for all their strangeness, often revolved around the silent machinations of power, the expectations of courts, or the private quirks of emperors. But now we turn to a wedding night that was less about awkwardness or political maneuvering and more about an immediate, palpable sense of foreboding, a union steeped in ambition and destined for tragedy, the marriage of Mary, Queen of Scots, and Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley. Mary Stuart's story is one of the most poignant in history. Born in 1542, she became Queen of Scotland when she was barely 6 days old, after her father James V died. Sent to France at the age of 5 for her safety and education, she grew up in the glittering, sophisticated court of the Valois kings. She was beautiful, intelligent, and charismatic, fluent in several languages, and deeply devoted to her Catholic faith. In 1558, she married the French Dauphin, Francis, who soon became King Francis II. For a brief period, she was Queen Consort of France and Scotland, and through her grandmother, Margaret Tudor, she also held a strong claim to the English throne, a claim fiercely contested by her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I. But fate, as it often does in royal lives, intervened swiftly. Francis died in 1560, leaving Mary a young widow at 18. France was no longer her home. In 1561, she returned to Scotland, a deeply Protestant country ruled by stern, uncompromising nobles, many of whom viewed her Catholic faith with suspicion. Mary faced immense pressure to marry again, not for love, but to secure her throne, to produce an heir, and to strengthen her precarious position against the ever-watchful eye of Elizabeth I. Enter Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley. He was a cousin to Mary, sharing a common grandmother in Margaret Tudor, which meant he also had a claim to the English throne. He was tall, handsome, and outwardly charming, possessing the kind of superficial appeal that could easily captivate a young queen. He was also English-born, a fact that Mary hoped would appeal to the English queen and perhaps even legitimize her own claim to the succession. Their shared lineage and the potential for a combined stronger claim to England made him, on paper, a highly attractive match. Mary was initially infatuated. She saw in Darnley a man who could be her equal, a partner in power, and a means to solidify her dynastic ambitions. But her infatuation quickly soured into disillusionment. Darnley, for all his good looks, was vain, arrogant, and dangerously ambitious. He lacked political acumen and possessed a profound sense of entitlement. Before the wedding, he began to demand the crown matrimonial, which would have granted him kingship for life, even if Mary died. This was a direct challenge to her authority and a clear indication of his true character. Mary, intelligent and perceptive, began to see the true nature of the man she was about to marry, a man who sought only to dominate and control. Despite her growing doubts and the strong opposition from many of her Scottish nobles, who saw Darnley as a puppet of England, or simply as an unsuitable and dangerous influence, Mary pressed ahead with the marriage. Perhaps she felt trapped by the political circumstances, or perhaps she still clung to the hope that she could control him. The wedding took place on July 29, 1565, in the Chapel Royal at Holyrood Palace in Edinburgh. It was a Catholic ceremony, a deliberate choice by Mary that further alienated her Protestant lords. The atmosphere was thick with tension, not joy. The air was cool, and the very stone walls of the chapel seemed to absorb any warmth. Guests exchanged uneasy glances. The weight of political calculation hung heavy, far outweighing any genuine affection. Darnley, dressed in fine silks, looked proud and almost defiant. Mary, though beautiful in her bridal gown, carried a subtle shadow of resignation, a quiet sadness in her eyes. It was a union born not of love, but of dynastic ambition and a desperate gamble for stability, a gamble that would profoundly backfire. The wedding night itself, instead of bringing intimacy and the hope of a peaceful future, only solidified Mary's growing unease. Darnley, emboldened by his new status, immediately began to assert his perceived authority, making demands that went beyond the bounds of a husband and into the realm of a co-ruler. He was not interested in quiet companionship or building a shared life. He was interested in power, and he made that abundantly clear. The privacy of their chambers offered no respite from the political storm that had gathered around them. Mary, who had hoped for a partner, found herself instead with a demanding and petulant child, albeit one with the title of king. The early days of their marriage were marked by his escalating demands for the crown matrimonial, his jealousy of her other advisers, and his increasingly erratic and dissolute behavior. He would drink heavily, indulge in wild escapades, and publicly humiliate his queen. The gilded rooms of Holyrood, once a symbol of her return and hope, now became a cage. This immediate friction culminated in one of the most brutal acts in Scottish history, just 7 months after their wedding: the murder of David Rizzio, Mary's private secretary. Darnley, consumed by jealousy and resentment over Rizzio's influence and closeness to Mary, and manipulated by a group of Protestant lords eager to diminish Mary's power, orchestrated the assassination. Rizzio was dragged from Mary's very presence while she was heavily pregnant and brutally stabbed multiple times. This horrific act not only shattered any remaining trust or affection Mary had for Darnley, but also exposed his treacherous and unstable nature to the world. Their wedding night and the days that followed had laid bare the true destructive foundation of their union, setting in motion a chain of events that would lead to Darnley's own violent death less than 2 years later, and ultimately to Mary's long imprisonment and execution. It was a marriage that began with an ill omen and ended in disaster, a testament to how deeply personal and political fates could intertwine in the lives of monarchs. The stage for our next unusual wedding night was set in a different era, one of grand palaces and Enlightenment ideals, yet still bound by the rigid traditions of monarchy. We travel now to the court of France in the late 18th century, to a union meant to solidify an alliance between two great European powers, France and Austria. The individuals at its heart were still children, thrust into roles they were ill-equipped to handle, and their wedding night, or rather the many nights that followed, became a source of immense public and private anxiety, stretching like a quiet, persistent shadow over their early lives. On May 16, 1770, a marriage of immense political significance took place at the glorious Palace of Versailles. The groom was Louis Auguste, the Dauphin of France, grandson of the reigning King Louis XIII. He was just 15 years old, a shy, awkward boy, more interested in the quiet solitude of hunting and the intricate workings of locksmithing than in the glittering, demanding life of the court or the immense responsibilities of a future monarch. His bride was Marie Antoinette, the youngest daughter of the formidable Empress Maria Theresa of Austria. She was even younger, only 14, vivacious and spirited, with a natural charm and a love for music and dancing, but utterly unprepared for the stifling etiquette and intense scrutiny of the French court, a world away from her more relaxed upbringing in the imperial palaces of Vienna. Their wedding was a spectacle of unparalleled luxury and grandeur, designed to impress and to project the power of the Bourbon dynasty across the European continent. Thousands of guests, from the highest nobles adorned in their finest silks and powdered wigs, to curious commoners lining the roads outside the palace gates, gathered to witness this union, hoped to bring lasting peace and stability between the two long-standing rivals, the Habsburgs and the Bourbons. The ceremony itself was a blur of rich, heavy brocades, glittering diamonds, and solemn vows exchanged in the ornate, echoing chapel. The air was thick with the faint scent of perfumes and a palpable sense of anticipation. The wedding feast that followed was lavish beyond imagination, with endless courses of exotic dishes, rivers of fine wines, and the sounds of music echoing through the vast gilded hall of mirrors. The evening culminated in the traditional bedding ceremony, a public ritual where the newlyweds were escorted to their chamber by members of the royal family, a symbolic act signifying the expectation of immediate consummation and the fervent hope for a swift heir to secure the dynastic line. The heavy velvet curtains of the royal bed were drawn, but the eyes of the entire court were still fixed on the door, silently awaiting the news that would bring a collective sigh of relief. But despite all the pomp and circumstance, something was profoundly amiss, a quiet discord beneath the surface of celebration. The young couple, barely more than children, found themselves overwhelmed not just by the weight of royal expectation, but by their own inexperience, their personal inhibitions, and a deep, unspoken awkwardness. Louis Auguste, known for his timidity and a deeply ingrained lack of confidence in himself, was unable to fulfill his marital duties. Marie Antoinette, a lively girl by nature, eager for affection and companionship, found herself in a vast foreign land, surrounded by strangers who judged her every move and burdened by a deeply personal secret shame that quickly became the subject of whispers throughout the court and beyond its walls. The news, though never officially confirmed by the royal household, spread like wildfire through the back stairs and salons. The marriage had not been consummated. Our journey through history's peculiar wedding nights now brings us to a union born of political necessity, set against a vast and powerful empire. We turn our gaze to 18th century Russia, to the wedding of two figures whose individual fates would become inextricably linked with the destiny of a nation, Catherine the Great and Peter III. Their wedding night was less a celebration of love, more a somber prelude. And so, while empires in the East grappled with bitter strategic unions, a new era was unfolding in the West, bringing with it a different set of pressures for those destined to rule. We turn now to a union that, while outwardly a picture of Victorian propriety and stability, began with its own quiet subversion of tradition and was subjected to an unprecedented level of public and political scrutiny: the marriage of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. When Victoria ascended the throne of Great Britain and Ireland in 1837, she was a young woman, barely 18 years old, full of youthful energy, yet burdened by immense responsibilities. She inherited a vast empire that spanned the globe and a crown that had lost some of its luster after the often scandalous reigns of her uncles. The weight of expectation on her slender shoulders was immense, far beyond what any ordinary young woman could comprehend. She was expected to embody national virtue, to restore the monarchy's standing as a moral compass, and crucially, to provide a direct heir to secure the line of succession for generations to come. She was, in essence, a living symbol of the nation's future, even before she was truly allowed to be a woman with her own private desires. The question of her marriage was paramount, a constant topic of discussion in political circles and public discourse. As a reigning monarch, the choice of her consort was not merely a personal decision based on affection, but a critical matter of state, involving intricate international diplomacy and domestic political considerations. Various European princes were considered, presented as potential candidates, but one stood out, not just for his suitable lineage, but for his quiet intelligence, strong moral character, and intellectual curiosity. Her first cousin, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha. Albert was a thoughtful young man, deeply interested in science, art, and philosophy, a stark contrast to the often frivolous and gossipy court life he observed during his visits. Their first meetings were cordial, marked by polite conversation and mutual observation, but it was certainly not an instant, overwhelming romance. Victoria, still finding her footing and asserting her authority as queen, was initially hesitant to marry, valuing her newfound independence and the freedom that came with her unique position. She had spent a childhood under "We have traveled through centuries, across continents and cultures, witnessing unions that, while deeply personal, were never truly private." From the ancient sands of Egypt to the gilded palaces of Europe, the wedding nights we have explored were rarely just about two individuals finding love or companionship. They were often crucial strategic alliances, forged in the crucible of power, dynasty, and cold political calculation. These unions, seemingly intimate, were in fact profoundly public spectacles, shaped by forces far larger than any single heart. Consider the young pharaoh Tutankhamun and his half-sister Ankhesenamun, burdened by the immense weight of a divine lineage and the urgent need for a male heir to secure a fragile dynasty. Their extreme youth and familial ties meant their union was less a matter of personal choice and more a dynastic imperative. The innocence of childhood was overshadowed by the immense pressure to ensure the continuation of a bloodline, a burden far heavier than any ordinary marital vow. Their union was not a celebration of two souls uniting, but rather a desperate gamble for stability in a turbulent age, a silent prayer for the future of a kingdom, with their private lives inextricably linked to the very survival of Egypt. Then, the opulent and unsettling world of Emperor Nero, whose marriage to Sporus blurred the lines of societal norms and personal desire, driven by a profound need to recreate a lost love and perhaps to shock a world that he felt he already controlled. His was a display of absolute, unchecked power, bending reality to his will, reflecting an emperor's eccentric whims rather than any genuine conjugal bond. It was a union born of eccentricity and a tragic yearning, played out on the grand stage of Rome, a testament to how far one individual, wielding ultimate authority, could push the boundaries of convention and defy expectation. The clandestine vows of Isabella of Castile and Ferdinand of Aragon speak not of easy royal decree, but of audacious courage, and a shared, ambitious vision. Their wedding night, shrouded in secrecy and executed with daring, was an act of profound defiance against established royal authority, a high-stakes gamble that paid off spectacularly, uniting two powerful kingdoms and laying the indelible foundation for modern Spain. Their story reminds us that even within the rigid confines of monarchy, there was ample room for personal risk and profound, transformative ambition, shaping the destiny of an entire nation through a deeply personal yet politically charged decision. The ill-fated union of Henry VIII and Anne of Cleves, on the other hand, was a stark and immediate lesson in the inherent fragility of political marriages based on mere painted portraits and diplomatic convenience. Henry's immediate, visceral distaste for his new bride led to an unconsummated marriage and a swift, humiliating annulment, demonstrating in no uncertain terms how even the most powerful monarch could be undone by personal preference, with immense diplomatic repercussions reverberating across Europe. Their wedding night was not just awkward, it was a prelude to a political earthquake, revealing the critical human element at the very heart of statecraft. Mary, Queen of Scots, and Lord Darnley's wedding was steeped in foreboding, a union driven less by affection and more by intricate political maneuvering and a shared, perhaps fatally misguided, ambition for power. Their marriage, fraught with jealousy, mistrust, and escalating power struggles from its very inception, quickly unraveled, leading to tragic, violent consequences for both individuals and for the tumultuous future of Scotland itself. It was a union that epitomized the inherent dangers of marrying for strategic advantage rather than genuine affection, casting a dark, indelible shadow over a young queen's reign and ultimately leading to her downfall. The long-delayed consummation of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette's marriage highlighted the immense public scrutiny and the profound personal immaturity that could afflict even the most prominent royal couples. Their extreme youth and profound inexperience, coupled with the crushing weight of expectation from an entire nation desperate for an heir, transformed their private intimacy into a matter of urgent state, a vital symbol of the monarchy's fertility and future stability. Their struggles were a poignant reminder that even gilded cages could hold immense personal pressure, transforming a private, intimate moment into a potent symbol of national anxiety and royal vulnerability. Catherine the Great and Peter III's unhappy pairing was a masterclass in strategic calculation and mutual, undisguised disdain. Their wedding night, utterly devoid of warmth, affection, or even common courtesy, set the chilling stage for a dramatic power struggle that would ultimately see Catherine seize the throne through a coup, forever altering the course of Russian history and consolidating her own legendary power. Their union was a brutal political chess match, where personal feelings were ruthlessly sacrificed at the altar of ambition, demonstrating how a lack of harmony in the bedchamber could lead to seismic shifts in power and profound historical change. Finally, Queen Victoria and Prince Albert's wedding, while ultimately blossoming into a deep and enduring love match, still bore the heavy weight of immense public expectation and the unique pressures of a reigning monarch proposing to her chosen consort. Their initial wedding night, and indeed their entire marriage, was observed with intense scrutiny by a public eager for a stable, moral royal family, as they became not just a couple, but the very embodiment of a nation's values and aspirations. Their story shows that even when true love blossoms between powerful individuals, the crown still casts a long, demanding shadow, requiring a delicate balance between deeply personal happiness and unwavering public duty. These stories, spanning millennia and encompassing vastly different eras, unveil a fascinating and consistent truth. The most intimate moments of powerful lives were rarely, if ever, free from the grand sweeping narratives of history. Each strange wedding night, each awkward encounter, each calculated political decision, each desperate hope, each quiet anxiety contributed in its own way to the intricate and vast tapestry of human civilization, shaping empires, altering bloodlines, and determining the fate of millions. They remind us that history is not merely a dry collection of dates and battles, but a living, breathing drama, often played out in the deepest, most private spaces of human lives, even when those lives were lived under the brightest, most unforgiving spotlight. As you reflect on these extraordinary journeys through time, allow yourself to consider how the inexorable forces of fate, unchecked ambition, and unpredictable circumstance intertwine so profoundly with the deeply personal choices and emotions of individuals. Allow the echoes of these ancient vows, these royal anxieties, these human desires, and these strange beginnings to gently recede into the distance. The world of emperors and queens, of prophecies and power, of grand ceremonies and quiet despair, now drifts softly away. Let your mind clear, finding profound peace in the quiet stillness of the unfolding night. You have journeyed through history, witnessing the intricate, often challenging dance between the personal and the political, the public and the private. Now, let these tales settle into the quiet, undisturbed corners of your memory as you prepare to embrace the deep calm that patiently awaits you. Allow your breath to deepen, your thoughts to soften, and your body to relax completely, sinking into the tranquil, comforting embrace of sleep. May your rest be truly profound and utterly undisturbed as the captivating stories of the past gently fade into the peaceful serenity of the present moment, leaving only a quiet, restorative peace.